Happy Friday, friends. It's Miss Drywa. So today's our last day of talking about weathering, erosion, deposition. We're going to put it all together and we're going to compare the three and see if we can really identify the different effects that these three items can have on the Earth's surface and how they kind of fit together and work together as like a team. So I'm going to read a passage to you. We're going to look at some images together, and then you're going to complete an earpod. And you can have a wonderful weekend. All right, so let's get started. So, it's basically everything we've been reading all week, just kind of put together so we could see it as one big whole. So, we have weathering, erosion, deposition. Earth's surface is constantly changing, and new land is constantly being formed. Rocks get broken down by weathering, moved through erosion, and deposited by or dropped somewhere else through deposition. Weathering is the process where rock is dissolved, worn away, or broken down into small pieces. Weathering can shape rocks into unusual formations. Water, wind, ice, and plant roots are all causes of weathering. For example, rainwater can easily enter cracks in rocks. When it gets cold, the water may freeze and expand in the crack. The ice will eventually split the rock. Also, plant roots can grow in rocks and cause them to split. So again, we have a picture here. Remember, friends, weathering is the breakdown or breaking down rocks into smaller pieces. So this big rock was once one big piece, and now it's broken into two, with a bunch of other little rocks around it. Okay, so remember, you can have water getting in the cracks can cause that. A tree nearby, the roots of the plant can cause that. Wind, all blowing constantly sand into the rock can cause it to break. So this is weathering, the breaking of rocks. Erosion is the process by which water, ice, wind, or gravity move pieces of rock and soil. The crushed rocks and rubble are called sediments, and when it rains, they are washed away into streams. If it does not rain, strong winds can blow them away. Gravity makes soil and rocks move downhill. Erosion can happen quickly or take thousands of years. For example, the Grand Canyon, located in Arizona, is a very big hole in the ground that is the result of constant erosion by the Colorado River. It took over millions of years as rocks were taken away. So, erosion, friends. So now we have erosion is now the water, the wind, the ice moving pieces of rocks. So remember we said with weathering, there might be pieces of rocks that break down or fall off the rock, and when something becomes smaller, it becomes lighter. So now the water and the wind can move that those little pieces of rocks or soil, the sediments. They can move the sediments somewhere else. Then we get to deposition. Deposition is the dropping of sediment by wind, water, ice, or gravity. After pieces of the earth are moved through erosion, they are deposited somewhere else through deposition. It could be only a few feet away or many miles away. Deposition happens when water slows down or stops moving, the wind dies down or stops blowing, or when the glaciers melt. New landforms can also be created from the deposited material. For example, waves can deposit sediment in areas offshore where they can build up to be sand dunes. Weathering, erosion, and deposition are constantly changing our landscape. Can you imagine how most areas of our Earth will look years from now? So deposition, friends, so our backtrack, is dropping. So now you have erosion is moving it and deposition is dropping the sediment somewhere else. So they can, sometimes create new landforms. Like in our video yesterday, we talked about the sand dunes. When you're on the beach, the sand blows and goes somewhere else, and now you have a sand dune. Same thing with the water, or gravity drops it to the ocean floor. So now these things have changed, these landforms have changed over years. Now let's just think about some of the stuff that we might see years from now. They're gonna be so different. It's gonna be crazy. I mean, the Grand Canyon, friends, that was just one big flat land. And just the river came in, and years and years and years, it created this big hole where the river's at the bottom of it. It moves the rock somewhere else. And now it's this beautiful, famous place that people go to see. So let's look at some examples. I have some images here. So this one's the limestone shoreline weathering in Guam. So it's in a different country, but we looked at it. I'm going to see if I can zoom us in. There we go. Okay, so we looked at this rock here, and we saw that the rock once looked like what's on top was the whole entire thing. But on the bottom, weathering has caused it to change. Whether it was from the water rising up or wind constantly blowing against it, the rock has changed though, and little pieces fell off, which then erosion came in and moved them. This rock here, it's a physical weathering in Iceland. Again, another country, but you can see the giant crack and all the little cracks around it. This giant crack could have been one tiny little crack that water got in, froze, and then, unfreezed and went away. More water got in, froze, and every time the water would freeze to ice, the rock would have to be separated little by little, and eventually the whole thing just cracks. So, pretty cool. I see tons of water around it, so I can believe that's possible. Now I have two examples of erosion here. So a natural arch produced by wind erosion in Jordan. So the wind just picking up sand and blowing it could cause the weathering, and then the erosion is that all those pieces of the rock that were broken off, now erosion moved it. We have here too, this could be created by erosion. So this is a rock formation sculpted by wind erosion in Bolivia. So again, friends, it's just erosion is moving the pieces. And, it has to be put somewhere else, which then brings us to deposition. And the deposition is the sand blown by wind deposits in the form of sand dunes in Death Valley. So this could have been flat years ago, millions of years ago, but from the wind constantly blowing and erosion constantly happening, it has to land somewhere, and it lands and forms sand dunes. Now this rock here in Mississippi, this rock, from sand being blown and landing on it, it turned it yellow. It wasn't yellow once before. And now it is, because the deposition of where the sand was landed, now it has a yellow tinge to it. All right, so we have weathering is the breakdown of the rocks. Then erosion comes in and it moves the pieces of the rocks. And eventually they have to drop somewhere, and that's deposition. All right, friends, so great job. You have a Nearpod, and then you have an amazing weekend.